The community center room was stifling, smelling of burnt decaf coffee and old floor wax. My left leg, the one made of carbon fiber and titanium, was throbbing, a dull ache that usually meant I'd been standing too long or a storm was rolling in across the Ohio plains. I ignored it. I kept my eyes locked on Deborah Hartwell. She sat behind the long folding table like she was presiding over a high court, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, a gavel resting near her manicured hand. "Miss Hartwell," I said, my voice raspy but steady. I held up a thick manila folder, my knuckles white. "Before we discuss neighborhood aesthetics or property values, I have one question. Can you tell this room where $40,000 of our HOA funds disappeared to?" The room went dead silent. Then a collective gasp rippled through my neighbors. Deborah's practiced plastic smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "I used to think the hardest battles of my life were fought in the dust and heat of the Arghandab Valley," I thought. I was wrong. Sometimes the enemy doesn't wear a uniform. They wear a power suit and carry a clipboard. But let me back up. This didn't start with missing money. It started 45 days ago with a garden. 5:45 in the morning. My internal clock doesn't care that I've been out of the army for years. I sat on the edge of my bed and strapped on my leg. Click. That sound always meant it was time to get to work. I'm 58 years old. I spent 22 years in the service, rising to Master Sergeant before a roadside IED in Kandahar back in 2011 decided I'd had enough of the infantry. I came home to Ohio with a Purple Heart and a limp that never quite goes away. I hobbled out to my backyard. The air was cool, smelling of damp earth and the first hint of summer heat. This garden is my sanctuary. After the war, the noise in my head, the PTSD, never really stopped. But when I'm out here, tending to my brandywine tomatoes, my bell peppers, and the neat rows of romaine lettuce, the noise fades. It's more than a hobby. My veteran's pension covers the basics, but the money I make selling organic produce at the weekend farmer's market pays for the specialized maintenance on my prosthetic and the mounting medical copays. It's my livelihood. It's my peace. "Morning, Ray. You got any of those heirloom cherry tomatoes today?" That was Eleanor, my neighbor from 2 doors down. She's 72, a widow with a heart of gold and a porch that always needs a bit of sweeping. I handed her a brown paper bag stuffed with greens and reds. "For you, Eleanor?" "Always," I said with a nod. "You're a godsend, Ray. This place would just be a bunch of mowed grass and beige siding without your backyard," she told me, patting my arm. Then there was little Tommy from across the street. He'd run over, eyes wide, asking if the giant peppers were ready. I'd give him a handful of sun sugar tomatoes, and he'd eat them like candy. To most people in Maple Creek, my garden was a landmark. It was proof that something could grow and thrive, even after taking a hit. The peace broke on a Tuesday afternoon. A white Lexus, polished so bright it hurt to look at, pulled up across from my driveway. Deborah Hartwell stepped out. She was in her early 50s, wearing a sharp navy blazer and carrying a tablet like a weapon. She was the newly elected HOA president. She'd won on a platform of elevating our community standards and protecting property investments. I watched her from my porch as she walked the sidewalk. She wasn't looking at the trees or the kids playing. She was looking for violations. When she reached my property line, she stopped. She lowered her sunglasses, her eyes narrowing as she looked at my garden stakes and the lush green vines peeking over the fence. She didn't wave. She didn't say hello. She just took a photo with her tablet, tapped the screen a few times with a look of pure disgust, and kept walking. I felt that old tightening in my chest, the same feeling I used to get when the scouts reported movement in the tree line. I knew right then, Deborah Hartwell didn't see a garden. She saw a target. 3 weeks after Deborah Hartwell took the gavel, the first shot was fired. It didn't come from a gun. It came in a crisp white envelope with the Maple Creek Homeowners Association logo embossed on the corner. I sat at my kitchen table, my morning coffee still steaming, and read the words, Notice of Non-Compliance, Uniform Aesthetic Standards. The document stated that under a new amendment, all agricultural cultivation visible from the street or common areas was strictly prohibited. It claimed my garden was a visual nuisance that detracted from the neighborhood's cohesive identity. I had 14 days to remove the beds and sod over the area, or I would face a fine of $250 per week. $250. That was nearly my entire monthly grocery budget. In the Army, you learn that paperwork is your best friend or your worst enemy. I didn't panic. I didn't storm across the street. Instead, I went to my hallway closet and pulled out the thick plastic bin containing my home purchase records from 2012. I spent 3 hours meticulously reading the original HOA bylaws. I went through every line of the landscaping and external maintenance section. There was absolutely nothing about vegetable gardens. The only restriction was that grass had to be kept under 4 inches and no rusted vehicles could be parked on the lawn. I sat down at my computer, typed a polite professional letter, and printed it out. I attached a copy of the original bylaws with the relevant sections highlighted and sent it via certified mail, just like I was taught. Always create a paper trail. Deborah didn't respond by mail. She showed up at my door 2 days later, accompanied by a man named Miller, a quiet yes man who served as the HOA treasurer. Mr. Delgado, she said, her voice dripping with a fake sugary concern that made my skin crawl. I assume you received our notice. We haven't seen any progress on the removal of those planters. I sent you a letter, Miss Hartwell, I replied, leaning slightly against the doorframe to take the weight off my prosthetic. The original bylaws don't prohibit gardens. I'm well within my rights as a homeowner. Deborah's smile didn't move, but her eyes turned into chips of ice. The board held an emergency session last month, Ray. We updated the standards to ensure Maple Creek keeps up with the surrounding luxury developments. You weren't at the meeting, I take it. I wasn't notified of any meeting, I said firmly. Well, notices were posted on the community board, she lied, glancing at Miller, who nodded sheepishly. Ignorance of the rules isn't an excuse. 14 days, Ray. After that, the fines will speak for themselves. The 14 days came and went. I didn't touch a single tomato plant. Then the bills started coming. $250 for week 1, $500 by week 2. By the end of the month, the HOA was demanding $1,000 in accrued penalties and administrative fees. I sat at my kitchen table with my ledger, my monthly veteran's disability check, and my Social Security were fixed amounts. I had my mortgage, my utilities, and the insurance for my truck. Then there was the $800 a month for the specialized physical therapy and the maintenance on my leg. The math didn't work. It was a simple, brutal equation. To pay the HOA, I had to stop something else. I picked up the phone and canceled my quarterly appointment with the prosthetic specialist in Columbus. I told myself I could manage the discomfort for another few months. I felt a familiar, hollow ache in my gut, the feeling of being surrounded and outgunned. It wasn't enough for Deborah to drain my bank account. She wanted my reputation, too. Eleanor called me one evening, her voice trembling. "Ray, have you seen the Facebook group? The Maple Creek community page?" I didn't spend much time on social media, but I logged in. Deborah had posted a long, winding update about neighborhood progress. She didn't name me directly, but she didn't have to. It's disappointing when certain residents think they are above the rules we all follow. We have one individual who uses his status to ignore the standards that keep our property values high. It's ungrateful to the community that welcomes him. The comments were a battlefield. People who didn't even know me were calling me a slob and saying I was trashing the neighborhood. Someone even suggested I should move to a trailer park if I wanted to farm. I sat in the dark, the blue light of the screen reflecting off my glasses. Ungrateful. The word stung worse than the shrapnel had. I had bled for this country's flag before she probably knew how to fold one, and now I was a nuisance in my own home. The final blow arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was a legal document delivered by a process server, a notice of intent to foreclose. The HOA had placed a lien on my house. Because I hadn't paid the thousands of dollars in unpaid fines, they had the legal right to seize the property and sell it at auction to recover the debt. This house, the only thing I truly owned, bought with a VA loan and a lot of sweat, was being taken from me by a woman with a grudge and a clipboard. I had 30 days to pay the full amount or vacate. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked out into the garden at 2 in the morning. The moon was high, casting long silver shadows across my rows of peppers and beans. I looked at my house, the beige siding, the roof I'd patched myself 2 years ago. Then I looked at the garden. This dirt had saved my soul when I came back from the desert. It was the only place where I felt like a whole man again. I knelt down in the dirt, my prosthetic hinge creaking in the silence. My hands were shaking. I reached out and gripped the stem of a young, healthy beefsteak tomato plant. My fingers tightened around the base. Just pull it up, I told myself. Tear it all down. Lay some sod. Give her what she wants so you can keep the roof over your head. It's just plants, Ray. It's not worth losing your home. I started to tug, the roots resisting, the smell of fresh green life filling my nose. But I stopped. I looked at the soil under my fingernails and realized that if I pulled this plant, I wasn't just saving my house, I was surrendering the last piece of myself. I didn't pull. I let go of the plant and slammed my fist into the dirt. I stayed there for a long time, kneeling in the dark, the weight of the world on my shoulders. I was at the bottom. I had no money, the neighborhood turned against me, and the law was on her side. But as I wiped the dirt from my palms onto my jeans, a cold, hard clarity washed over me. I was a master sergeant in the United States Army. I didn't survive Kandahar to be bullied out of my home by a suburban tyrant. If she wanted a war, she was going to get one. But this time, I wasn't going to use a rifle. I was going to use the truth. The next morning, I didn't head out to the garden with a hoe. I sat at my small oak desk with a fresh black moleskin notebook and a ballpoint pen. In the infantry, we lived by the after-action report. If it wasn't written down, it didn't happen. I started at the beginning. July 14th, received first notice. July 16th, sent certified response. July 18th, verbal confrontation on porch. I logged every cent they had charged me, every interaction with Deborah, and every minute I spent dealing with their violations. Control the narrative, Ray, I whispered to myself. I wasn't going to fight this with anger. I was going to fight it with a paper trail so long and so accurate that she couldn't skip over a single word. My first mission was to get the official records of the meeting where these new rules were allegedly passed. I drove down to the HOA management office, a sterile beige suite in a local strip mall. The receptionist, a young girl named Sarah who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, wouldn't look me in the eye. "I'm sorry, Mr. Delgado, but those minutes are currently being archived for the annual audit. I can't release them without formal board approval." "I'm a dues-paying member of this association, Sarah," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "Chic state law says those records are open to me." "She has her orders, sir," she squeaked. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply took out my notebook, looked at my watch, and wrote, August 3rd, 10:15 a.m. Denied access to meeting minutes by staff on orders from board president. Then I turned around and walked out. It was a setback, but in recon, even a no is a piece of information. That evening, Eleanor knocked on my back door. She wasn't carrying her usual garden shears. She was carrying a stack of papers. "Ray, you aren't the only one," she said, her voice trembling with indignation. "She sent a notice to the Hendersons about their bird bath. She told the Miller family they couldn't have a swing set because it cluttered the horizon line. She's even fining Mrs. Babel because her driveway has a hairline crack." We sat on my porch as the sun went down. Eleanor had been busy. She talked to 5 other families who were being squeezed for aesthetic fines. We realized Deborah wasn't just being a Karen. She was being a predator. She was targeting the seniors and the families who didn't have the energy to fight back. "We're not just neighbors anymore, Eleanor," I told her. "We're a coalition." I called an old friend from my days at Fort Bragg, Bill the Suit Henderson. Bill had transitioned out of the service and became a forensic accountant for nonprofits. I told him what was happening. "Ray," Bill said over the phone, "HOAs are notorious for mission creep. But usually when someone pushes that hard for fines, they're trying to cover a hole in the bucket. Under Ohio Revised Code Section 1702, you have a statutory right to see the financial ledgers. Don't ask the receptionist. Send a notice of inspection via a process server. Make it look like a lawsuit is coming." I took notes until my hand cramped. I didn't have much money left, but I had enough for a filing fee and a gallon of coffee. It took 2 weeks and a very stern letter from a legal aid clinic, but the HOA finally dumped a box of financial statements on my porch. They thought they were burying me in paperwork. They didn't realize I used to read logistics manifests for a battalion. I spent 3 nights on my kitchen floor, the air conditioner humming in the background. I had my bank statements on one side and the HOA's operating expenses on the other. Then I found it. There was a payment for $1,800 to a corporate leadership retreat at a high-end spa in Cleveland. Another $3,000 for professional office consultation, paid to a shell company that, after a quick search, was registered to Deborah's sister-in-law. There were charges for high-end Italian office furniture for a community office that didn't exist. Deborah wasn't just elevating the neighborhood, she was treating our dues like her personal piggy bank, and my garden finds were helping to balance her books. I took my findings to a small office downtown. Above the door, it said Veterans Legal Justice Initiative. I met a young man named Marcus. He was a former JAG officer, sharp as a bayonet and wearing a suit that cost more than my truck. He looked over my notebook, the original bylaws, and the financial records I'd unearthed. A slow grin spread across his face. "Mr. Delgado," Marcus said, tapping his pen on the table. "Not only did she fail to hold a legal vote for these new amendments, which makes your fines and the lien on your house completely void, but this financial stuff, that's potentially criminal embezzlement." He leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "She's been bullying a combat vet to pay for her spa days. I'll take your case pro bono, Sergeant. I think it's time we went on the offensive." Marcus suggested we give her one chance to surrender. He drafted a formal demand for rescission and cease and desist letter. It laid out the legal invalidity of the fines and the evidence of the financial discrepancies. I delivered it myself. I walked up to Deborah's house, my prosthetic leg feeling solid on the pavement. She opened the door, looking at me like I was something she'd stepped in. "You told me, Ray, we don't negotiate," she said, trying to shut the door. I held the envelope out. "It isn't a negotiation, Deborah. It's a courtesy. Read it. Correct the records, drop the lien, and resign. We can do this quietly, or we can do it at the general meeting on Thursday." She snatched the envelope, her face turning a blotchy red. "You're a delusional old man. My lawyer will sue you for defamation before you can even open your mouth at that meeting. Get off my property." She slammed the door. I stood there for a second, then walked back to my house. I felt a strange sense of calm. The quiet way was off the table.
The next 48 hours were a whirlwind. Eleanor was on the phone tree every hour, making sure every resident who had been bullied was going to show up. I made one more call to a man named Greg Miller. Greg was a reporter for the Dayton Daily News who did a weekly segment called The Watchdog. I told him I had a story about a suburban HOA president, missing veteran funds, and a fraudulent foreclosure. "I'll be there, Ray," Greg said. "Bring the receipts." Thursday evening arrived. I put on my best button-down shirt, tucked the black moleskin notebook into my pocket, and grabbed the manila folder. My leg was aching, but my mind was clear. I wasn't just defending a few tomato plants anymore. I was defending the home I had bled for. The Maple Creek Community Center was packed. I could see the sweat on the brows of my neighbors, people I'd known for a decade, who were now looking at me like I was a stranger. Deborah sat at the front, her gavel resting on the table like a scepter. She looked out at the crowd, her eyes stopping on the reporter from the Dayton Daily News sitting in the back. She stiffened, but she didn't back down. "We have a lot on the agenda tonight," Deborah began, her voice amplified by a cheap PA system. "But first, we must address the ongoing non-compliance of one of our residents. Mr. Delgado, your fines have reached $4,750. The association is moving forward with the foreclosure process." I stood up. My prosthetic leg gave a sharp metallic click
that echoed in the silence. "Ms. Hartwell," I said, my voice echoing through the hall. "Sit down." The room gasped. Deborah's jaw dropped. "How dare you?" "I have the floor," I said, pulling the thick manila folder from under my arm. I walked to the front of the room, every step a heavy, deliberate thud. "I have here the original 1998 bylaws of Maple Creek. Section 4, paragraph 2, states clearly that landscaping is at the owner's discretion, unless it creates a drainage hazard. Your amendment from last year, it was never voted on by a quorum of residents. It's a piece of fiction." I turned to the crowd. "And I have the bank records. Deborah, could you explain to your neighbors why $2,400 of our dues went to a leadership retreat at the Azure Spa in Cleveland? Or why $3,000 was paid to Hartwell Consulting, a company owned by your sister-in-law?" Marcus, my lawyer, stood up beside me. "For the record," he added, "under Ohio law, these unauthorized fines and the lien on Mr. Delgado's home are legally void. We are prepared to file a class action suit for harassment and embezzlement if this board does not act immediately." The breaking point. The room didn't just erupt, it boiled over. "She fined me $200 for my bird bath," Eleanor shouted, standing up and waving a crumpled notice in the air. "You told us the pool repairs cost $10,000, but the ledger only shows 5. Another neighbor, Mr. Henderson, yelled from the back. Deborah's face went from pale to a deep bruised purple. She grabbed the gavel and slammed it down. "This meeting is adjourned. You're all out of order." "No, Deborah," I said, leaning over the table so I could look her right in the eye. "You are." The other 2 board members, Miller and a woman named Sarah, looked at the shouting crowd and then at the reporter in the back. They looked at each other and nodded. "As vice president," Miller said, his voice shaky but audible, "I move for an emergency vote to remove Deborah Hartwell from the position of president, effective immediately, pending a full forensic audit." "I second that motion," Sarah said. Every hand in the room went up. Deborah didn't even wait for the final count. She grabbed her designer bag and stormed out the side door, her heels clicking frantically on the linoleum. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal filings and quiet victories. The new board, led by Miller and Eleanor, officially rescinded every aesthetic fine issued in the last year. I received a formal letter of apology and a check for $1,200, the full refund of the payments I'd managed to scrape together. But the biggest relief came in a thin white envelope from the county recorder's office. The lien on my home was gone. The foreclosure was nothing more than a bad memory. Deborah Hartwell moved out of the neighborhood 2 weeks later, her white Lexus disappearing down the road just ahead of an investigation by the local prosecutor's office for the missing $40,000. 3 months later, the morning sun was hitting my backyard with a warmth that felt like a blessing. The garden wasn't just back, it was bigger. I had added 3 more raised beds where the grass used to be. But the view was different now. I looked over the fence. Little Tommy was in his own yard, kneeling in the dirt with a plastic trowel I'd bought him. He was planting his own row of cherry tomatoes, his tongue poking out in concentration. His dad was sitting on the porch, giving me a thumbs up. I'd been elected to the new HOA board as the Director of Community Standards. My first act was to write the Right to Garden Amendment. It passed with a unanimous vote. Now, instead of visual nuisances, the neighborhood was dotted with small vegetable patches and wildflower gardens. I stood in the center of my garden, the smell of damp earth and ripening peppers filling the air. My leg was aching, but it was a good ache, the kind you get from an honest day's work. not from the stress of a looming battle. I used to think I'd left my service behind when I took off the uniform. I thought my fighting days were over. But standing here, watching my neighbors help each other harvest their first crops, I realized I'd just been reassigned to a different front. I wasn't just a man with a prosthetic leg and a garden anymore. I was a part of something. I was a protector of this little patch of Ohio. I looked up at the flag hanging on Eleanor's porch, fluttering in the summer breeze. I'd fought for that flag in the mountains of Afghanistan, but I'd fought for it just as hard right here on Maple Creek Drive. I've learned one thing through all of this. The most important battle you'll ever fight isn't always for a foreign border. Sometimes it's for the ground right beneath your feet. My name is Ray Delgado, and I'm keeping my garden. But I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up to a Karen or an HOA that thought they owned your life? How did you fight back? Share your story in the comments below. I'll be reading them, and we'll pick the best one to share in next week's video. Don't let them take your peace. Keep growing.